Some very sad news to bring you today, as it has been announced that legendary professional wrestling villain, one of the greatest villains certainly in professional wrestling history, and one of the most successful bookers of all time during his run as the WCW booker, the Taskmaster Kevin Sullivan, has sadly passed away. Sullivan, who had been dealing with a number of health issues in recent months, was 74 years old. Now, as I mentioned, he was one of the most legendary professional wrestling villains of all time. Longtime Florida wrestling personality Barry Rose confirmed the death of his longtime friend, writing, quote, "With the heaviest of hearts, we are devastated to have to report the passing of the legendary Kevin Sullivan. May he rest in peace, and his family, friends, and fans find comfort in how much he was loved," end quote. Now, in early July, the family had revealed that Sullivan had been in grave danger. Quote, "The GoFundMe request for financial aid set up by his daughter, Nicole, noted that on May 12, 2024, while at a Florida autograph signing, that Kevin suffered a devastating accident. He underwent surgery that was emergency surgery that saved his leg and life, but faced severe complications, including sepsis and encephalitis. This unforeseen catastrophe had placed an immense financial burden on his family, as Kevin had been in and out of consciousness in the ICU far from home. Despite these challenges, Kevin has shown incredible resilience. Months later, he is still fighting to regain his independence." Now, friends, colleagues, and fans rallied around Sullivan, and the campaign quickly reached far beyond its original goal. Over the last few days, a number of Thank You Kevin and Get Well Kevin videos and posts were created for Sullivan to see. Ric Flair wrote on X, quote, "Kevin Sullivan has been one of my closest friends in the business. His knowledge of all sports, not just wrestling, is unparalleled. He is one of the most brilliant minds in the history of our business. Kevin led WCW to a 1.5-year victory over WWE and dealt with so many personalities like Hall, Nash, the NWO, Eric Bischoff, the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and Hulk Hogan. Stay strong, Kevin. We need you." Now, Kevin Francis Sullivan was born on October 26, 1949 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. At the age of 8, he had rheumatic fever. He said, quote, "I was in bed for a year. I didn't walk for a year. I actually started in my basement. I found a set of weights. We lived in a 4-decker, and I found a set of weights, and that's how I started working out." His wrestling school was really the television, and each Saturday he'd take over the family's TV in their Cambridge apartment. Soon, wrestling around the Northeast and into Quebec, having not really officially trained, Sullivan proved to be a sponge, though, and soaked up knowledge. Heading to Florida, where of course he might be best known, in 1972, after 13 months in Tennessee, proved to be the jumpstart his career needed, and he studied under the learning tree of promoter Eddie Graham. Quote, "Eddie Graham used to say it takes 5 years to understand what you're doing. For me, it was about 5 years, or maybe a little earlier, because I had some great teachers," Sullivan told Alex Marvez of the Wrestling Observer. "When I first came down here, me and Mike Graham, were partners. The other day, someone told me they remembered when me and Mike Graham won our first titles. I couldn't even remember who we beat. I got to wrestle Bobby Shane, which was like wrestling a guy with Brian Pillman's talent. I got to wrestle against Dory and Terry Funk. I wrestled guys who used me as a punching bag. There was Jack and Jerry Briscoe, Danny Hodge. I was very lucky to have that opportunity." Of course, he didn't really look, shall we say, like a professional wrestler back in the day, only 5'9", but solidly built. He wrestled at around 250 pounds. Sullivan made it work against bigger opponents. Superstar Billy Graham saw that often. Quote, "He was a tremendous talent, especially for his stature. He could make people forget the difference in size, especially when wrestling Blackjack Mulligan." Graham, Wayne Coleman, told journalist Scott Williams in 2004. Mulligan would have to get on his knees, and he was still bigger than Kevin, but Kevin Sullivan was able to carry it with guys twice his height. Very, very intense, and a lot of believability, and personally a great friend, end quote. He learned everywhere he went in the WWF of 1975 to 1976. He was dwarfed by the bigger opponents, but size never mattered to him. And he was a master politician as well as a master booker, as Ric Flair mentions, during the time of WCW, during the heyday of the NWO. In so many interviews, both with his website and with others, he is asked to talk about other people and not himself. He had insight galore. In his 2012 interview with Slam Wrestling, he talked about former colleagues he would see at the upcoming Fan Fest, but little about his own life or career. In a 2018 interview with Steven Johnson, talking about storytelling, Sullivan was able to both celebrate current wrestlers and put over the past. He said, quotes, "I hate to say this because the guys today are much better athletes than my generation or any generation before this, but they're trying to write for these guys and it doesn't work. You have to be pretty close to that character," Sullivan told Johnson. "The greatest talkers from his generation," said Sullivan, naming superstar Billy Graham, Blackjack Mulligan, Dusty Rhodes, Ernie Ladd, King Curtis. "The comparisons hurt modern day storytelling." Quote, "When you watch these guys, the pressure was on you to perform and come through with a good interview. And after a while, you knew if the interview worked, you could draw people in. Some of those guys weren't the greatest performers, but the way they talked was so believable," he said, launching into a King Curtis. On live television, the television show was running a minute short, so King Curtis was tapped. He just went out, counted from 60 to 0. "You have to be willing to put your ego aside to tell a story. I always say about baby faces, to be a knight in shining armor, you have to slay a dragon, not a salamander, meaning you have to really put the heel over and fight from the bottom, much like Ricky Morton does," added Sullivan. In 1984, he portrayed a cult-like leader in championship wrestling from Florida, gaining wide fame through his gimmick. He was the Prince of Darkness, Kevin Sullivan. "All of the devil stuff, it was very unique," Graham told Williams. "Kevin made me laugh a lot, and he was crazy, but he performed that bit to a T. Kevin was a funny guy, a great guy. He was someone I had known for a long time, and he was funny, but he was able to really convince the people they had that fear that he was legit." Now, through the devil, or though the devil or Satan weren't mentioned in the Florida interviews, it was inevitable to invoke the whole "you can't kill the devil" aspect in 1992 when news erroneously broke of Sullivan's death. John Arezzi wrote about it in the Pro Wrestling Spotlight newsletter in March of 1992. Arezzi wrote, quote, "Calls were placed to George Napolitano, other wrestlers, promoters and reporters. No one knew anything. Finally at 5 p.m. I spoke to Kip Fry, who informed me that he spoke to Kevin earlier on in the day. Phew. From relief, my feelings turned to anger. Who started this rumor and why? That night, I must have received 25 calls, all telling me Kevin Sullivan was dead. And there must have been a dozen different causes of his death. From a drowning to being shot to the drug OD, the stories were getting more fantastic as they were coming in. I was really angry about all this, but getting more curious about how Kevin and Nancy Sullivan were reacting. The following day, I got Nancy on the phone. She told me that it was a madhouse at their place for the past 2 days. They literally got over 100 calls about Kevin's death. I asked her to have Kevin call me. Later that evening, my phone rang. This is a dead man calling. I picked up to speak to my dearly departed friend Kevin. Then Arezzi got Sullivan on the phone. All this started on Friday, February 14th. I got a call from Janie at WCW offices. She said she heard I died in a car wreck. I assured her I was okay, and that was the end of it. On Sunday, Nancy and I went to get Hump, Oliver Humperdinck, to go to the Edgar Gantner Memorial Service. In the car, Hump told me he got a call from a girl he knows in Charlotte, North Carolina, who said I was shot in a bar. This gets even stranger. We stayed away from home on Sunday. Monday, we got home around 5:30 p.m. and in our parking lot is the chief of police, who was a good friend of mine. He was ready to knock my door down because he heard I was dead inside the apartment. We got in the house and there was 100 calls on the machine. Here I was at a memorial service for a friend and everyone is saying I'm dead. It's nuts. The craziest story we heard was that Hump came to my house with 2 guys. There was a drug deal that went bad and I had a gunfight. I was shooting everyone. I was killed and Hump was kidnapped. What the hell could you get for a ransom for Humperdinck? 2 pairs of sweat socks? Then we heard Nancy was locked up for conspiracy. It was mad. At least I know I got a lot of friends. Apparently the rumor started from a CompuServe computer service, which has a wrestling insider information program. The mix-up probably resulted with confusion over Buzz Sawyer's death and some idiot not knowing his facts. The story is funny in a way now, but when you hear about the death of a friend, it's scary. Nancy summed it up when she said, "Remember one thing, John, you can't kill the devil." And for all Sullivan's championships in wrestling, where it was in territories like Florida, Central States, the Northeast, Georgia, the Gulf Coast, Tennessee, or on a national scale like in World Championship Wrestling, his influence on the business may have been greater behind the scenes. For those that wanted to learn and listen, Sullivan was there. At the Cauliflower Alley Club in 2015, almighty Sheikh Joe Kabibo thanked Sullivan for talking to him for hours about booking. Quote, "You teach me so much every time you talk to me on the phone." Quote, "He was such a genuine human being and we became friends the second we met. I thought the world of him," added Barry Rose. Family-wise, Sullivan had 4 children from 3 marriages. His first marriage, there were 2 children, Shannon and Ben. His most known union was to Nancy Toffaloni, who was a fitness model in and around Florida and began appearing as a valet. She later left Sullivan, of course, for Chris Benoit. In a case of Sullivan as booker, essentially booking his own divorce, and she was assigned to spend time around Benoit. Of course, when Benoit killed Nancy and their son Daniel in 2007, Sullivan was wrongly implicated in the double murder-suicide by overzealous fans. His third marriage to Linda Taylor, a former bodybuilder, resulted in 2 daughters, Nicole and Bianca. The Sullivans ran the Froggy Fitness Gym in Upper Florida Keys for a time. Sullivan has been celebrated by his peers aplenty, including a men's wrestling award from the Cauliflower Alley Club in 2022, the NWA Hall of Fame in 2014, the New England Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in 2013, and more. Of course, as I mentioned, he was the booker of WCW during the time of the NWO. He was the booker of Nitro in those early days that led to that victory over WWE for 83 weeks, and of course he was also an on-screen talent at that time, infamously with the Dungeon of Doom. There was the match involving Brian Pillman when he called him Booker Man, because of course at the time he was the booker, and certainly such a legendary villain and a legendary professional wrestler. Rest in peace, Kevin Sullivan. You will be missed.